In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we are joined by former Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Unit, Frank Figliuzzi, to talk about his new book, Long Haul: Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. In this book, we talk about his research and how he went about writing this book. We get into the reality of sex trafficking. We talk about the hundreds of unsolved murders where the victims were dumped along our nation's highways and interstates. We talk about the trucking industry. We talk about solutions and the law enforcement and analysts that are trying to piece all of this together. I want to thank Frank so much for taking the time to share his experience writing and researching this book. We had some crazy technical difficulties while recording this episode, but he was such a good sport. I want to thank him so much, and let's get into the interview. You served for 25 years as a special agent with the FBI, and you were the assistant director for counterintelligence with the agency. So that was directing all espionage investigations across the government. So I'm familiar with military intelligence. That's kind of my background. But what is it like doing counterintelligence with the FBI?
Yeah, catching spies is different than gathering intelligence, which is, so we counter the efforts, I'm speaking in present tense. The FBI counters the efforts of foreign intelligence services operating against U.S. interests, most of the time inside the United States. Many people really don't fully grasp the threat that indeed every day there are people, even within the United States, who wake up and try to work against U.S. interests by stealing information of all kinds. Corporate trade secrets, which is economic espionage, military secrets, and then increasingly these few years, actual operations against how Americans get their information, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, all over social media, lots of influence campaigns to really the battle for the American mind through foreign intelligence services.
You were also a national security contributor and a regular columnist for NBC and MSNBC. That must have been a big transition. I feel like, especially in this political climate, must be an interesting job.
Becca, if someone had told me several years ago that, Frank, you'll go from this clandestine, quiet world of counterintelligence and you'll be on national TV regularly talking about the foreign threat to America, Russian influence and attempts to interfere with the U.S. election. You'll be talking about domestic terrorism threats. I would have said, you're out of your mind. What has happened? And it's still, I've been doing that for over 7 years. It's still awkward. It's still tough to get on and talk about things that really are on the kind of dark side of the law enforcement intelligence communities.
You've also written 2 books. You wrote The FBI Way: Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. And then the book we're going to talk about today, Long Haul: Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. And for Long Haul, you started researching this after you retired from the FBI. Is that correct?
I sure did. A lot of people with Long Haul just make the assumption that, Frank's writing about some cases or operation he worked while he was an agent. And that's not true. I'm actually somebody who prided myself on knowing all the nooks and crannies of the FBI. But I only fully came to understand the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative after I retired from the Bureau. And that's what fascinated me and kind of made me have to write the book.
So you mentioned in your interview with Julia Cowley on The Consult that there's often a lot of pressure, especially when it comes to writing books in the true crime genre, to kind of have everything be focused on the gruesome details. And I imagine that probably sells more, but you chose to not go that route. Can you talk about that pressure?
Yeah, I sure can. It's interesting because despite being in law enforcement and intelligence for 25 years, carrying a badge and a gun, I was never the guy who came home and sought out true crime shows and movies. I lived true crime, and I don't need to come home and watch that. Nor did I really read a lot of true crime. Some. So this was kind of my baptism by fire. And I didn't sit down, Becca, and say, when I wrote Long Haul initially and had the idea, I didn't say to myself, I'm going to write a true crime genre book. That's where it will be in the bookstores, on the true crime shelf. I didn't think about that. I wanted to write a book about 3 subcultures that we live alongside: long haul truckers, sex trafficked victims, and the crime analysts who try to connect the dots and stop the killing. Those were the 3 subcultures I was fascinated by. So I get into this with my publisher and even my book agent, and they were encouraging me to, like, hey, you're in the true crime genre. Let's have some more crime.
Mm-hmm.
Let's less culture, more crime was what I felt, what I perceived. And if it bleeds, it leads, kind of an attitude. And let me say this: the book is dark enough. The book features the very worst trucker serial killers in American history. And I open with Robert Ben Rhodes, who is arguably the most evil trucker serial killer and arguably one of the most prolific killers for a long period of time. So I felt it was there, and I didn't want to detract any more from the study of 3 subcultures.
Throughout your research and when you were putting this book together, was there any moment where you felt like your assumptions about any of these groups were shifting significantly?
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the answer is yes to all 3 subcultures. So, and I never want to stop learning, and I hope readers have the same attitude about reading this book, Long Haul. Yeah, so let's go quickly through the 3 subcultures and where I had kind of biases or preconceived notions. First, the long haul trucker subculture, which I knew very little about. Gosh, I thought it sounded boring to me. I didn't know that they made as much money as they did in some circles. I didn't know that in some kinds of long haul trucking, you really needed to be mentally sharp and physically sharp. I learned more about that. I happened to ride, for example, along on a flatbed, big flatbed that hauled stuff across the country. That requires math and physics and calculations of weight distribution, points of securement. Do you strap or tarp or chain this load? How is the load properly put forward, backwards, middle on the flatbed? People skills while you're waiting to be loaded and you're trying to troubleshoot issues with the client. All of that is happening, not to mention physical exertion. Thank goodness for that. Otherwise, you'd be sitting forever for hours a day. So, we were responsible for strapping and chaining and tarping. And the tarps weigh 100 pounds folded up, and you're heaving them up onto the flatbed and then up and over the load. So, yeah, I mean, that was all of that, a preconceived notion of where people come from. The driver that I rode with, he was a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America. He was a professional chef for a time before he went into long haul trucking. A buddy of his and that he recruited into long haul trucking had a degree in physical therapy and was trying to make money for a master's degree in physical therapy. So you can throw out those preconceived notions. Secondly, with regard to sex trafficked victims, again, I think we all have preconceived notions about, well, that wouldn't happen to anybody I know, or, those are people on the other side of the tracks. But I talked to people who went to college, Caucasian, blue eyes, Midwest. One person in the book is a preacher's daughter, so you gotta throw away those biases that you might have. And then lastly, on the crime analyst side, it was a realization that this entire FBI initiative, Highway Serial Killings Initiative, known as HSKI, is driven not by gun and badge special agents in the Bureau, but rather crime analysts. No gun, no badge, brains, computers, knowledge. That's who's out there trying to solve these murders.
For the victim side of it, I think a lot of people have misconceptions, like you mentioned, as to who becomes a victim of sex trafficking and how I think people have this idea that victims are snatched off the street by a stranger. Can you talk about those misconceptions and how a lot of these victims actually get into being sex trafficked?
Yeah, this theme is a good one, and it's one I really wanted to get across in the book, which is this. You can't begin to solve crimes unless you understand the universe of people you're looking at, right? And you can try and you can go, well, I'm just going to talk to people, or I'm just going to use forensic science. My approach to investigation is the same approach I took to this book, which is to understand the people I'm going to write about first. And I got deep into those three subcultures. We've talked about, there's a caste system that I discovered within long haul trucking, the way they look at themselves based on the kind of truck that they drive and the kind of loads they carry and different certifications. And there's different pay levels for people who, for example, do the wide load, the extra size load, the hazmat drivers, and all of that, all the way down to what's called dry vanners. And I was in a flatbed truck. They're very physically and mentally engaged with their load, so they're kind of higher up on that hierarchy if there is one. But then the same insights occurred when I was trying to understand sex traffic to victims. And first, to seek to understand, I talked to the experts. I talked to arguably the two most recognized experts on street level and truck level trafficking in the country. Dr. Celia Williamson, University of Toledo, and Dr. Dominique Rose-Sepowitz, Arizona State University. And what I liked about them was they weren't just academics teaching in a university class. They're street. They're on the street. It's real life experience, hands-on understanding of what's happening, and they're applying their research to solutions on the street. And I was fascinated by that. And what did they tell me when they said, look, Frank, when you go out and talk to women who are victims, you're going to see some things and you're going to want to kind of check off some boxes in your head. You're going to see early signs of trauma in their lives, regardless of where they come from. And I saw that. And it's what I call a tower of trauma that's stacked up in their lives. What do I mean by that? Often you see, in early life, even in preteen life, you might see unwanted sexual touching or worse. You'll see traumas in the house. That could be anything from very ugly divorces, domestic violence with the parents, police showing up for siblings or other issues, major illnesses, even death of a parent or sibling, suicides, hospitalizations, unwanted moves across the country, not fitting in, and then a series of bad boyfriends. The concept that I'm finding love and affection and affirmation outside of my home. This is the only person that loves me and cares for me. And then you'll see introduction to sex with that person, and then introduction to drugs, often starting with marijuana. That was very common, but then escalating fairly quickly to harder drugs. And I saw a rationalization in these victims, which is, he loves me. We need to make money to pay for our drugs. I'm doing this for him. I'm already having sex anyway. Why not the sex for money? And often that boyfriend is leading that charge, sometimes very subtly. And that's the trap. That's the trafficking trap. And I saw it regardless of race, socioeconomic background, education. Those traumas were there.
I think it's really interesting when you look at kind of this cycle of violence that the victims find themselves in. They're in and out of jail. They're addicted to drugs and maybe alcohol. I think a lot of that can really alienate family members and friends, and that kind of just keeps them stuck in this cycle of violence. In your experience, for the women that were able to get themselves out, what did that process look like for them?
I think the biggest takeaway I had on that is that there is no magic formula, and success is only going to happen when that person decides it's time. So Friends, relatives, people can drag you into a rehab or a resource center, get you out of that environment, et cetera, et cetera. But it has to be your decision. And, it's cliche for us to say, well, you have to hit rock bottom. You hear that a lot with alcoholics and drug addicts. But there's truth to that. That rock bottom is different for different people. Often what this looks like is an ugly journey. It's repeated jail sentences. You start stealing for drugs, you start getting arrested for prostitution, which is something else I go into, by the way, in law enforcement solutions in the book, that arrest really doesn't work when you're dealing with a trafficking victim. But we can talk about that in a minute. But there's no magic formula. The thing is to present what these experts do who run places for women who decide, I need to get out of the trafficking world. They tell me, and I visited one very successful place called Starfish Place in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a partnership between the city and Arizona State University, and really awesome. It's for young women with children who want out of the trafficking trap. But what happens is you make things available and you offer resources so that they know where it is. They know help is available. They have that phone number or your card, and when it's time, you're there for them. And they know that's how that works. And often there are numerous failed attempts. It's not unlike, because this is also closely linked with a substance addiction and mental health. It's not unlike what you hear from people who are substance addicted. Yeah, it took 3 times. It took 4 times at rehab. Yes, that's how it works. But they knew the resource was there. So half the battle really for these folks who are in anti-trafficking and nonprofit organizations is to simply let people know they're there for them when it's time. That's how that works.
You touched on law enforcement, and in your book, you mentioned that historically, investigators and law enforcement maybe haven't taken these types of cases as seriously because they involve sex workers. How do you think we can change the culture so that these victims get the attention that they deserve?
Yeah, slowly but surely, it is changing as law enforcement agencies see results. Right? They're very results oriented. So this model that previously existed of, hey, you're on my street corner, you're doing something unlawful by soliciting prostitution, you're a criminal, I'm handcuffing you, and you're going to jail tonight, and I've solved the problem for 24 hours or less. Well, you didn't really solve anything. What you did was cause a situation where a victim, someone who's being trafficked, someone who's part of a stable, as it's another vocabulary word I learned, is going to get bailed out by none other than their pimp. Their pimp's going to show up. And what does that do for that young person? It says, yeah, I was right. My pimp's the only one who loves me and cares about me and gets me out. And of course, that victim is going to be back on the street in a matter of hours. So you solved nothing, and you've made the police look like the bad guy. So you need to break that model. And I've seen it done successfully, even back when I was in the FBI and I was the special agent in charge of the FBI in Northern Ohio, the Cleveland, Toledo, Akron, Youngstown area. We saw it really work in Toledo. And believe it or not, Toledo is a national hub of sex trafficking because of the convergence of various interstate highways, major train system, and trucking, all converging, and its proximity to Detroit. So we learned a lot in the FBI in Northern Ohio. And we learned that partnering with the Sheriff's Department, Lucas County, with Toledo PD, and saying, look, we're gathering the local nonprofit organizations, the resource centers, the people who are helping women, particularly young people, trafficking victims. We want to partner them with you. And the FBI's victim witness program was very active in doing this as well, mostly staffed by women, I have to say. And I think that's important. And so instead of an officer saying, you're under arrest, the approach is, I'm not arresting you tonight. What do you need to get out from under this trap you're in? And by the way, here's someone from the community who's here to help. And the answer might be, I need to get away from my pimp. I need a roof over my head. I need diapers for my baby. I need a job, right? And the answers lie with that resource person that's there to say, I have those things for you. Let's go right now. Now, I'm drug addicted. I need rehab. I can put you in a rehab facility tonight. That all has to be in place. And only then can you start, when you develop that trust and relationship with these victims, might they start talking and providing intel on what could be a national level trafficking ring, which is exactly what happened in Toledo. They're only going to cooperate if they build trust with you through partnership.
I think those are such good points. The education and partnering victims with resources, I think, is so important. You mentioned in your book you were able to go tour some of the resources and programs available to victims in Phoenix. Nationwide, are there more resources like that, or are there enough? And if not, how do we make those types of programs available and more accessible?
Yeah, there's a lot out there. That's the good news. The not so good news is, of course, there could be more resources, which always comes down to money. And that could be grant money, people volunteering their services. They need volunteers. And I also visited a place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And there's different models of this, by the way, and none's better than the other. Starfish Place in Phoenix, for example, is an in-house, it's a residential campus. You get your own apartment, very nice campus with your children. You get taught life resources right there, job hunting, resume writing. All the skill sets are taught and offered there in a very nice environment. Then you look at what Dr. Celia Williamson is doing in Toledo. It's not residential at all. It's community based, so that they may give you money for that apartment, but it's not their apartment. I mean, they're going to give you the skill sets. They're going to offer training to you, but it's not that you're living under their roof, and that's a different model. You can't say one's better than the other, but we need all of that and more, and it often comes down to money, grants, and volunteerism.
Circling back to the truckers, I really loved how in your book you bring up and highlight how essential the trucking industry obviously is to our country and our economy. And you brought such a humanity to the truckers. I mean, you talk about how proud they are of what they do, how they're just trying to provide for their families, but that didn't come also at the expense of talking about some of the darker sides that you learned about in trucking. And something that I was kind of surprised to learn about were the high rates of alcohol and drug use among the truckers. Was that something that surprised you?
Yeah. So again, I really wanted to dig deep here and learn the life of truckers. And I rode, how did I do that? In part, I rode over 2,000 miles in a big rig, trying to soak up the culture. Does that make me an expert on long haul trucking? Absolutely not. But I got a flavor of it that many Americans never get. And I did go out of my way to explain in the book the economic importance of long haul trucking to our economy. Hundreds of $billions in gross freight revenue every year earned by the industry. We would stop getting groceries at the grocery store in 3 days if long haul trucking came to a halt. We saw some of that during COVID, but really truckers kept us going during COVID. So it's a vital part of it. I also emphasize that we're talking in this book only about a tiny, tiny fraction of long haul truckers who kill multiple times. So, there would be a tendency to pick up this book and say, my God, truckers got a real problem. And they really don't. But here is the issue. It is the perfect profession for a serial killer. Why is that? It's a mobile crime scene. It's a crime scene on 18 wheels. They're grabbing a victim in one jurisdiction. They're killing and or raping them in a second police jurisdiction. And they're dumping the body in a third police jurisdiction. And all of that can happen in one day, a number of hours. And the poor sheriff's deputy who finds a body alongside the highway, no ID on her, partially dressed or not at all, has a daunting task in front of them. Where did she come from? And if it's a trucker, how do I do this? Do I pull all the fuel receipts from all the fuel stops, the rest stops, way stations? And do I get this all from every trucking company in America who uses this stretch of highway? It's daunting. But yeah, and then you've got you've got a community of truckers that does get into the question I ask in the book, which is why? Why is long haul trucker the number one profession for serial killers? Are they attracted to the job because they know they can kill, or is it more the nature of the job that attracts someone of their personality and background? And I found alcohol and drug use, not so much right now, although alcohol is still a big factor. But yeah, you've got endless hours on the road. You've got to stay stimulated to not fall asleep at the wheel and stay alert. Then you've got mandatory downtime, and you better sleep during that period. So you need to get down, whether that's alcohol or drugs. You need to wake up early in the morning and get going again. And that lifestyle is particularly unhealthy, very sedentary for most truckers. I've read health studies, for example. There's a Canadian study I quote in the book, and it's just really bad from a health perspective. If you don't have issues before you start trucking, you're going to have them after you truck. And it has to do with your health and your conditioning and your mental health and all of that. And the food that's, if you're trying to eat right, which we try to do, you go to that truck stop, man, and you go to the shop in there, good luck trying to find something healthy to eat. So all of that combines to a really bad environment. And I had women, victims, tell me that they had done drugs with truckers, and that the truckers who scared them the most were the alcoholic truckers. Not necessarily the drug addict truckers, but the alcoholic truckers seem to be most violent.
The piece about the truckers who had alcohol problems being most violent was something that was really surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that. But speaking of this violence, and this is a big question. So throughout the book, we're obviously talking about the truckers that kill, but we're also talking about the truckers who participate in the exploitation and violence against these victims, the sex trafficked women. We're talking about the pimps who control and exploit and abuse them. We're talking about law enforcement, who you acknowledge in the book also sometimes exploit and abuse the victims that they're supposed to protect. And we spend so much time talking about how to keep women safe. We talk about the resources available for women and other victims of violence. We talk about ways we can keep ourselves safe. We look at the red flags, how to protect ourselves. But how do we stop men from committing violence against women and others? And that's a big question.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one. I think we need another hour and maybe another year to discuss men and violence and stopping violence in society. But let's take it a piece at a time, which is, okay, first, I want to say some good news about the trucking industry, which is there are many, many touching stories of truckers who actually rescue trafficking victims. And in fact, there's an organization called TAT, which initially stood for Truckers Against Trafficking. They do a lot of good work training truckers. Think about that intelligence opportunity. Who better than the guys and gals who are on the road every day than to be the eyes and ears of the anti-trafficking movement. And they not only does TAT train them, but they give awards every year for heroism, rescue, that kind of thing. So the approach there, in fact, one of the resource centers I spoke with and visited had they had a pledge that they used for men to take when they trained and educated men. they asked men to take a pledge saying that they would not be part of the problem. They would not be hiring victims for sex for money. And they took the pledge very seriously. I think we've got to start very young with our boys, particularly when we're talking about violence and attitudes toward women. And sometimes these killers, by the way, were acting out against, I'm convinced they were acting out against their mom, often an absentee mother or an abusive mother. So some of that trauma I talked about with the sex trafficked victims actually existed in the truckers' backgrounds, which is interesting. So men have to understand that the odds, if they're paying for sex, the odds that that person is a victim and being trafficked are greater than not. And you're contributing to that. Sometimes there's a whole area of immigrants who are being exploited, right, and lied to and smuggled into the country. There's that entire aspect of it. But we've got to start with our young boys, training them to have respect, teaching them to have respect for the opposite gender, and that violence isn't the answer, and that, the toxic, so-called toxic macho culture actually can breed violence if we don't funnel that properly.
Those are all such great points. And I love how you bring that up in this book. And it's not all just doom and gloom and the gruesome details. And you're not just saying, hey, here's this crazy problem that the FBI is trying to solve, but you actually walk through the problem set. It's so educational. You talk about all of these different solutions and the people that are trying to make it right. And like you said, I was so surprised to learn that even among the trucking community, there was an effort to combat trafficking. I think that is so cool. And those are the things I think we all need to be learning about. And so I'm really excited for everyone to read this book. I really think that no matter who reads it, there is so much that everyone can learn from it and from your experience researching and writing this book.
No, thanks for pointing that out. I did not want to be the author who wrote a book that was dark and problematic and said, hey, here's the horrible stuff going on under your nose. Have a nice day. I wanted to offer ideas and solutions in each of those three subcultures, like we talked about, law enforcement and increased partnerships. There's incredible research being done. In one place that's being done is out of Arizona State University, and Dr. Rose Sepowitz, who was really the first practitioner to study the Super Bowl, for example, and the demand for sex, particularly with victims of trafficking and or minors, that follows big events like the Super Bowl. You've got some big money people coming in who can afford Super Bowl tickets. They're going to party and they're going to want to, go off the charts on illegal activity sometimes. And so she did some studies of the Super Bowl, which were fascinating. She's developed algorithms. Here's where technology can come in and help. Algorithms and filters to screen advertisements for sex and tell you, based on keywords, phrases, and images, whether that person is more likely to be a victim of trafficking or not, whether that ad is more likely for an underage victim or not. And that research is being used by law enforcement agencies around the country, including Las Vegas Metro Police and City of Phoenix Police. So really good research and studies being done. Also, great research on who is most vulnerable. What young ladies, girls, are more vulnerable to falling into that trafficking trap than others, and saying, look, we've noticed some data. This only happens after thousands of interviews, right, and studies, and saying, look, so for example, lots of these young ladies had something to do with special ed in their schools, and we need to focus on that. We need to make counselors and teachers aware of that. We need to start alerting within high-risk school districts and schools. Young ladies that, hey, this might happen to you at an age-appropriate level, but don't do this. This is something that could start to happen in your life. And, things also like recruitment that takes place in jails. So I feature a story in the book that actually has been read by sheriff's departments in the country saying, we did not realize the degree to which recruitment and grooming for trafficking is going on in our jail. We read your book, and we actually, one sheriff's department contacted me. Actually, it was a ministry within a sheriff's district. Said they surveyed young ladies in the jail and asked them the question, hey, are people recruiting you here? And the answer is yes. And they said, yeah, here's 8 people who are doing it right now. And that means that someone in a rank structure within that stable of women working under a pimp was actually in jail, maybe for theft, maybe for prostitution, and was recruiting, saying, when you get out, call me, you can stay with me. And that's how that starts. So lots of good things coming out. There's hope on the horizon here. And, my vocabulary went from saying victim, victim, victim to victim, survivor, and then thriver. And that's the goal, is you can not only survive, but you can end up thriving after trafficking.
Frank, is there anything else that you want to touch on that we haven't covered already, either about your experience researching and writing this book or about any of the topics in it?
Let's see. First, I think if you're hearing this podcast and you're saying, look, sounds like an interesting book, but I certainly don't think anybody I know or anybody in my neighborhood or in my town would fall into this trafficking trap. I tell you, read the book, because it can happen, and increasingly it's happening online. You need to know what your young person in your life is doing online, and I make some suggestions there. If you're a parent, grandparent, you got to know who they're dealing with online. It starts today, often online. Someone on the periphery of that young person's contacts or networks is trying to groom and recruit. And maybe it's that bad boyfriend that's starting to come into the picture. The other thing is, if you think trafficking's not going on in your town, I don't have a truck stop here, so therefore, well, it's not at truck stops that much anymore. It's online. The advertising for sex for money is moved online versus more of the physical presence of traffic victims at truck stops. That's largely been cleaned up, and it's moving nearby to massage parlors and cheap motels near and around the truck stop. So you don't need that truck stop for you to have trafficking. There are cases where high school girls are being groomed and trafficked in nice communities. So there's that thought as well. And the book is for anybody who says, I want to learn more about what law enforcement's doing, or I always wondered what's going on inside that big rig alongside me on the highway. This book is for you as well.
Frank, where can listeners go if they want to purchase a copy of your book and follow your work?
So the good news is that the book is sold everywhere you get your books, including Amazon and all the major publishers. My publisher is HarperCollins. You can get it through their site. You can get it through Amazon, Books A Million, or just walk into a brick and mortar store and order it. The paperback is out now. So if you're saying, I don't want to plunk down $25 for a hardcover, the paperback is out. It's also on ebooks, and it's also audiobook, which I recorded myself. So there's many ways you can get the book.
Perfect, Frank. Well, I will link to all of that in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us.
Thanks for having me, Becca. I appreciate it.
Again, I want to thank Frank Figliuzzi so much for taking the time out of his day to talk to us about his book. I highly recommend you read it. I was going into reading this book expecting it to be just kind of a typical true crime book about serial killers, but I was blown away at the level of research and how many educational aspects of the book there were. I was especially happy to see so much talk about victimology and prevention and solutions and resources. I think that those aspects are missing a lot in the true crime genre, so I was really happy to see that in the book. So once again, I will link to his book and also to some of the resources we discussed in the description of this episode, so go check that out, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.